He stopped for gas. They were in the van next to him. 4 little girls, identical, silent, bruised. And in that moment, millionaire Julian Bexley knew something was very, very wrong. What he did next would change all their lives forever. The old house sagged like it was trying to disappear into the dirt. Its peeling walls and broken windows offered no comfort from the damp Arkansas cold. Inside, 4 little girls lay huddled together on a thin mattress that smelled of mildew and dust. Their cheeks were hollow, hair tangled, and the matching purple dresses they wore were now stained with grime and tears. They were 5 years old, quadruplets, identical in face, but each one marked by a different wound life had carved into them. Aubrey, the quietest, held a sock rabbit missing an eye. Juniper sucked her thumb silently, her wide eyes scanning the cracked ceiling like she was expecting it to fall. Haven whispered made-up fairy tales to distract the others. And Lacey hadn't spoken since the night they were told their parents weren't coming home. Their uncle, Martin Whitlock, paced in the next room. His boots thudded heavily across the floorboards, and every time he swore, the girls flinched in unison. He was all they had left, not that he cared. He wasn't their father. He wasn't even kind. When their parents had died in a highway accident, Martin hadn't shed a tear. He showed up with a lawyer and a piece of paper that said legal guardian, and within 2 days their home was sold, their clothes stuffed into garbage bags, and they were dumped into this crumbling shack miles from the nearest town. Martin hadn't worked in years. He drank, he gambled, and he ranted about how the system owed him something. But now even the system had turned its back. Bills piled up, food ran out, and 4 frightened little girls became, in his eyes, an opportunity. That night, while the girls slept fitfully in the cold, Martin sat at the kitchen table with a burner phone. His hands were shaking, but not from guilt, just greed. "They're healthy," he said into the phone. "All 4, same age, same face, pretty. No one's coming for them. 50 grand. That's cheap, right?" He listened to the voice on the other end. It was deep, muffled, in control. "No cops," Martin added quickly. "Just cash, and they're yours. I'll bring 'em to the airstrip. We got a deal?" The voice confirmed. Midnight, 2 days. Martin hung up, lit a cigarette, and took a long drag. His face looked like it had once known softness, but it had been replaced by something hard and hollow. In the other room the girls stirred. Aubrey sat up, rubbing her eyes. She thought she heard him say something about selling. But maybe it was just another nightmare. Maybe this time the fairy tale would have a good ending. She crawled closer to her sisters and whispered, "Stay close, okay?" They nodded, still half asleep. The wind howled outside. 2 days. 2 days until everything changed forever. Julian Bexley wasn't supposed to be in Arkansas. He had planned to spend the week in Aspen, reviewing proposals for a new philanthropic venture. But something inside him, restlessness, maybe regret, had driven him to take the back roads of the South instead. No schedule, no staff, no headlines. Just his Range Rover, a single duffel bag, and a desire to remember what real life looked like outside glass towers and quarterly reports. He was 41, quietly retired, and worth well over $800 million. His company, Mindtrace, had revolutionized neural data processing. But none of that mattered now. He had enough. More than enough. What he lacked was connection. Something that couldn't be bought or engineered. He pulled into a faded gas station just off Route 19. It was the kind of place with flickering lights, a single diesel pump, and a rust-covered vending machine buzzing like it was choking on moths. As Julian stepped out of his car, he noticed the van. It was parked crooked across 2 spots. The vehicle looked ancient. Patches of rust, shattered taillight, and a bungee cord holding the back doors closed. At first, he thought nothing of it, until he heard shouting. A man with thinning hair and a beer belly stood outside the open passenger side, yelling into the back of the van. "You stop crying, or I'll give you a reason to cry." Julian froze. Then he heard it, the soft, muffled sobs of children. Multiple children. He moved slowly, pretending to stretch his legs as he circled toward the soda machine. From that angle he could see inside. 4 tiny girls, maybe 5 years old, were squished into the back seat. They weren't making noise, but their faces said everything. Wide eyes, pale skin, thin arms. They weren't just frightened, they were resigned, as if this was normal. Julian's stomach twisted. One of the girls, Julian didn't know her name yet, but it was Juniper, glanced directly at him through the dirty window. Their eyes locked. Her lip trembled. The man reached into the van and yanked her arm hard enough that Julian saw her whole body jerk. The others huddled together. No one screamed, no one protested. Julian turned and walked back to his SUV, heart pounding. He didn't confront the man. Not yet. He wasn't impulsive. He'd learned the hard way that the world was far more complicated than heroes and villains. But he also knew evil when he saw it. And this was evil. Inside the car, Julian quietly activated his dash cam and aimed it toward the van. Then he snapped a photo of the license plate with his phone. He dialed a number from memory. Ronan McKay, a former Navy SEAL turned private investigator. The man owed Julian his life, quite literally, after Julian helped get his daughter into life-saving treatment years ago. "Ronan," Julian said flatly, eyes still on the van, "I need a plate traced. Right now." "Give me 10 minutes," came the reply. Julian hung up. By the time Martin returned to the driver's seat and pulled away, Julian was already in pursuit. At a distance. Quiet, controlled. The gas station faded behind them. 15 minutes later, Ronan called back. "You're not going to like this," he said. "That plate belongs to a Martin Whitlock. Arrests for assault, resisting, illegal gambling, even some whispers about human trafficking, but no charges stuck. He's the legal guardian of 4 girls, all same age, same last name. Their parents died last year." Julian's jaw tightened. "Get me everything," he said, "and fast." "You think he's hurting them?" Julian didn't hesitate. "I don't think, I know." The Range Rover's engine purred as Julian followed the van from a safe distance through winding roads and into darker territory, both geographically and morally. He didn't know yet who those little girls were. But something inside him had already made the decision. He wasn't going to let them disappear. Julian parked his Range Rover half a mile down the gravel road. Far enough not to be seen, but close enough to observe the decaying farmhouse Martin called home. He sat in silence, engine off, phone screen glowing with everything Ronan had dug up in the past 24 hours. It was worse than he'd feared. Martin Whitlock had filed for legal guardianship 6 days after the Quadruplets' parents died in a highway collision. No extended family contested it. No one knew the girls had survived, let alone where they'd gone. The social worker who approved the transfer had since been fired for taking bribes. And now Martin was in debt to a known trafficking ring based out of Tulsa. They called themselves Horizon Models, a front that scouted young girls from poor communities and offered them opportunities abroad. But the reality was darker. Girls vanished. And now 4 5-year-old sisters were scheduled to be handed off. Julian stared at the screen, where a blurry surveillance photo showed Martin in a diner booth with 2 well-dressed men. The timestamp was from earlier that week. A note from Ronan read, "Transaction confirmed. Meeting arranged. Abandoned airstrip. Outside Hugo, Oklahoma. Midnight tomorrow." Julian felt the weight of the moment press into his chest. He had the means, the reach, the power. But this wasn't business. This was a choice. He called Ronan. "I need a team." "Already assembling," Ronan answered. 2 ex-SEALs, 1 ex-FBI negotiator. No guns unless you say so. But you should know, the buyers are dangerous. "I don't care if they're ghosts," Julian said. "I'm not walking away from this." The following evening, the plan was in motion. Ronan's team would cover the perimeter of the airstrip, dressed as utility workers. Julian would play the role of the buyer, cash in hand, business casual, posing as someone desperate and morally flexible enough to pay for what couldn't be named aloud. The location was chilling, an old World War II-era airfield, long abandoned, with cracked tarmac and rusting hangars. A place no one would hear screams. Julian arrived early, the SUV's headlights slicing through the dark. He parked and waited. At exactly midnight, a battered truck pulled up on the opposite end of the strip. Martin stepped out, slamming the door. He was wearing the same flannel shirt Julian had seen at the gas station. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes darted nervously. The back door of the truck creaked open. 4 tiny girls stepped down, barefoot, arms zip-tied together at the wrists. Their faces were expressionless. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. Julian's stomach turned. He stepped forward with the briefcase, which was filled with realistic-looking bundles of cash. But it was bait. Ronan's team was already in place, radios live. Martin approached. "Didn't expect you to be early," he said, voice gruff. "Let's do this quick." Julian's expression didn't waver. "You said they were healthy." Martin jerked his thumb toward the girls. "They're fine. They don't talk much, but I figure that's a bonus for your kind." Julian gave a signal, a subtle tap of his ring finger against the handle of the briefcase. From the darkness, floodlights ignited. "Federal agents!" someone shouted. "Get on the ground!" Chaos erupted. One of the buyers reached for his waistband, but Ronan tackled him to the ground before he could draw. Another tried to flee, only to be dropped by a trained knee to the chest. Martin froze, eyes wild, then ran, only to be clotheslined by a steel pipe held by one of the SEALs. Julian didn't move. He went straight to the girls. They had collapsed to their knees, shielding one another. Haven was whispering something over and over. "Not again, not again." Julian dropped to his knees and gently lifted her chin. "You're safe now," he said, voice shaking. "No one's taking you. I promise." The girls stared at him like he was a dream. Then Aubrey whispered, "Are you the buyer?" Julian blinked. He nodded, but softly added, "I came to buy your freedom." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time since her parents' death, she reached out, touching his coat sleeve, as if to check he was real. Sirens wailed in the distance as local law enforcement arrived, tipped off anonymously hours before. Julian stood protectively in front of the girls as the scene unraveled behind him. Arrests, weapons, handcuffs. He didn't look back. He was too focused on the 4 little lives in front of him, and what came next. The SUV's engine hummed softly as Julian drove through the silent backroads toward Denver, one hand on the wheel, the other resting protectively near the girls seated behind him. It was just past 3 a.m. The highway was empty, lit only by moonlight and the occasional flicker of headlights from a passing truck. In the back seat, the Quadruplets sat close together, still wearing the same torn dresses, their wrists now freed but raw from the zip ties. Blankets were draped over them, and a plush bear Julian had grabbed from a gas station sat untouched beside Haven. None of them spoke, not even a whisper. They just watched the trees pass by as if they didn't trust what was happening. And maybe they didn't. Julian caught their eyes in the rearview mirror, Juniper's specifically. Her gaze wasn't just hollow, it was waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for a slap, a sharp turn, for someone to yell, for the kindness to disappear. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. When they arrived at the private children's hospital in Denver, one Julian had donated millions to build, the night staff were already assembled outside. 2 pediatricians, a trauma nurse, a psychologist, and a translator in case the girls didn't speak English. But Julian had already told them, "Don't crowd them. One step at a time." He gently stepped out and opened the back door. The girls didn't move. Only when Julian crouched down and extended a hand did Aubrey, cautiously and slowly, place her small fingers into his. He didn't tug, he didn't force, he simply waited. One by one they followed him inside. The medical assessments were heartbreaking. Haven had scratches along her forearms, some self-inflicted. Lacey was severely dehydrated and had stress-induced aphasia. Her inability to speak was psychological, not physical. Juniper had signs of being struck multiple times, and Aubrey, the most withdrawn, had bruising along her ribs, one of which had a small fracture. Julian stayed for every exam. When a nurse suggested the girls be taken to a separate room so he could rest, Julian calmly replied, If they don't want me to leave, I'm not leaving, so ask them. They stayed silent, but Aubrey grabbed his shirt and didn't let go. So he remained, sleeping in a chair in the corner, arms crossed, eyes always opening when one of them stirred. The next morning a woman entered the room. She was tall, brown-skinned, with kind eyes, and a presence that calmed the air. Her name was Dr. Naomi Vance, a child trauma specialist Julian had requested personally. She approached slowly, not as a doctor, but as someone who had spent her entire life helping children who had seen too much. "Hi, girls," she said softly, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to sit here for a while. That okay?" No one replied, but the girls didn't look away either. Day by day, Julian watched as Naomi worked her quiet magic. She never pushed. She brought sketch pads, coloring pencils, and soft toys, each left in the room with no expectations. She brought books and read aloud, even when no one responded. On the third day, Juniper started sitting closer. On the fourth, Aubrey took a crayon and began drawing what looked like a tree. Julian had converted the guest wing of his mansion into a makeshift home for them. 4 identical beds, decorated uniquely based on what little he had learned about their preferences. Lacey liked animals, Haven liked stars, Juniper liked books. Aubrey had once clutched a rabbit plush, so he filled her shelves with every variation of one he could find. He stopped taking calls. Board meetings could wait. For the first time in years, something real was happening in his life. Something that couldn't be bought with money, but demanded everything else. Patience, presence, and pain. One night, while he sat in the hallway reading legal documents about emergency custody, he heard soft footsteps. It was Haven. She stood barefoot, holding the plush bear from the SUV. "Mr. J," she whispered, barely audible. Julian looked up. His heart paused. "Yeah, sweetheart? Are we staying here forever?" Julian swallowed hard. He walked to her slowly, knelt so they were eye to eye, and said, "I hope so. But only if that's what you want." She looked down, then reached out and hugged him. The first hug, the first moment that didn't feel like rescue, it felt like trust. From that night on, the walls between them and the world began to crack. Just a little, but enough for light to get in. It was late March when the first snowmelt began to stream through the garden paths of Julian's estate. The tulips he had planted years ago but never noticed were starting to bloom again. And inside the once silent halls of the mansion, laughter, timid, then growing, finally returned. The girls were healing. Not all at once, not perfectly, but day by day, piece by piece. Julian kept a steady routine, something the therapists recommended. Structure made children feel safe. Mornings were for reading, mid-mornings for play, then therapy sessions with Dr. Naomi in the afternoon. Evenings were spent gathered around the dining table, where Julian insisted they always eat together, no matter how simple the meal. Most nights the food went half-eaten, and silence lingered. But slowly, the silence began to break. Lacey was the first to laugh. It happened on a Sunday morning when Julian tried, and utterly failed, to braid Aubrey's hair. The result looked like a bird's nest, and Aubrey stared at him wide-eyed like he'd committed a felony. Julian shrugged and said, "I was aiming for fashionable chaos." Lacey burst into a giggle so loud it startled even herself. Then she clapped a hand over her mouth, embarrassed. Julian looked at her and whispered, "There it is. Best sound in the house." Since that day, Lacey began making little drawings for him, stick figure portraits of Mr. J and the Bexley bunch, as she called them. Juniper was next. One morning she stood in the grand library staring at the massive globe Julian had brought back from Florence. Without a word, she pointed to a dot on the map and said, "Is that where penguins live?" Julian knelt beside her. "That's Antarctica." She looked up. "Can we go there someday?" He smiled. "We can go anywhere you want." Haven started speaking more too, often asking difficult questions about their parents, about why bad people like Uncle Martin existed. Julian never lied. He didn't sugarcoat. He answered with care, with honesty, and always ended with the same truth. What happened to you was never your fault, But it was Aubrey who broke his heart wide open. It was late one night, well after the others had gone to bed. Julian was in the den, half asleep on the couch, paperwork still in his lap. He felt something small curl beside him. He looked down to see Aubrey curled up with her sock rabbit. "I had a dream," she whispered, voice hoarse. Julian closed the folder and turned toward her. "Tell me?" She nodded. "I was back in the van, but this time you were there. You opened the door and light came in. Then we flew away." Julian blinked back emotion. "That's a good dream." She paused, then asked softly, "Are you going to keep us? Even when we're not broken anymore?" The question shattered him. He lifted her into his arms and hugged her tight. "I didn't keep you because you were broken," he said. "I kept you because you're you, and I always will." Spring arrived, and with it came warmth, not just in the weather, but in the way the girls began to live without fear. They picked out new clothes. They chose new bed sheets. They had favorite foods now. Juniper adored strawberry pancakes, while Haven put ketchup on everything. Lacey insisted on singing the same off-key song every morning. Aubrey would draw endless fields of green grass with 4 girls and a man with a very tall hat labeled Mr. J. Julian built them a treehouse in the backyard, one with a hidden door and a reading nook. It became their sanctuary. Dr. Naomi said, "You've given them something no one else ever did, a future they believe in." Julian didn't speak. He just looked at the 4 girls in the treehouse window, waving down at him. One afternoon, after a game of hide-and-seek, they sat on the garden bench beneath the cherry tree. Julian brought out ice cream cones, handing one to each of them. Aubrey licked hers slowly and said, "Do we get to stay forever?" This time all 4 stared at him, waiting. Julian leaned back, smiling. "You're already home. The rest is just paperwork." And somewhere deep inside them, the fear that had once lived in every breath began to shrink. The pain of the past still lingered, but the future no longer seemed like a threat. It was becoming a promise. By early summer, the Bexley estate no longer felt like a museum. It echoed with music, chatter, footfalls, and the occasional chaos only 4 or 5-year-olds could create. Paintings on the walls were now tilted because Juniper liked to fix them, and the long hallway that once led to Julian's office now displayed a series of framed crayon drawings that Lacey called our official gallery. But it was the community outside the estate that still didn't know what to make of it. People whispered. At the farmer's market, at the cafe, even among his board trustees, everyone had an opinion about the reclusive millionaire suddenly raising 4 little girls who looked like angels with matching curls and wide, curious eyes. Julian knew the rumors. That he was rescuing them for PR, that this was some midlife crisis charity stunt, that the girls were probably just a short-term project. He didn't dignify any of it with a response. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. But the girls were starting to notice the stares. One Saturday morning, he took them to the local bookstore cafe. He loved the ritual, letting each girl pick a new story to read together that night. It was peaceful, familiar, or at least it had been, until they reached the cashier. The woman behind the counter froze when she saw the girls. Her polite smile tightened. She glanced at Julian, then at the 4 identical faces. What a unique group," she said with forced brightness. "Are they yours?" Julian nodded, gently placing an arm behind Aubrey's back. "Yes." "All of them?" she asked, voice edged with disbelief. "Yes," he said again, this time with less patience. "They look... Well, they're certainly lucky girls," the woman added, ringing up the book slowly. Lacey tugged at his shirt when they left. She didn't think we belonged. Julian knelt to her level on the sidewalk. "She doesn't know anything about what we've been through," he said. "What matters is that you're loved. You belong with me. Always." That evening, Julian had his staff cancel every public meeting. He made a decision. If the world wanted to wonder, let them. But these girls would never doubt for a second that they were wanted. The next morning he called his lawyer, Sarah Peterman, and said only one sentence. "File the adoption papers. Today." The legal process had already been underway for weeks. Interviews, background checks, home inspections. But this was the final step. Official, binding. Sarah warned him that Martin Whitlock had written a letter from prison contesting the adoption. He claimed Julian had manipulated the situation, that the girls weren't mentally stable enough to make that choice. Julian didn't flinch. "Let him try," he said. "Let the whole damn world try. They're mine." Court proceedings were expedited due to the circumstances. Naomi provided her professional testimony, backed by child welfare officials and the private physicians who had tracked the girls' recovery. Every report told the same story. The girls were thriving under Julian's care. Their trauma was healing. Their personalities were blooming. Julian took them to the courthouse on a bright, cloudless day. He dressed them each in a different color dress, blue, pink, yellow, and lilac, so the judge wouldn't get confused by their identical faces. In the courtroom, the girls sat quietly until the judge, a kind-faced woman with silver glasses, asked, "Do you understand what it means to be adopted?" Haven raised her hand. "It means we don't have to go back." The courtroom fell silent. Julian's throat tightened. "And do you want Mr. Bexley to be your forever father?" the judge asked gently. All four girls nodded at once, then in unison said yes. Aubrey added quietly, "We already call him Dad." The judge smiled. "Then I see no reason to delay. The adoption is approved." Julian didn't speak at first. He couldn't. His eyes stung, his hands trembled, and he had to grip the bench to steady himself. Lacey reached up and took his hand. That night he surprised them with a new gift. Delicate gold necklaces with their initials engraved inside little heart-shaped lockets. On the inside flap of each was a photo he had secretly taken during one of their garden days, when all four were lying on the grass, laughing at something Aubrey had said. "This heart?" he said as they opened the boxes. "It's yours, always." The girls didn't say anything at first. Then Juniper whispered, "Does that mean you belong to us too?" Julian nodded, tears finally falling. "I always have." The years passed gently, as if time itself had decided to be kind. The girls grew older, and with each birthday, the weight of their past faded further into the background, replaced by school plays, piano lessons, science fairs, and late-night story sessions curled up on the couch with Julian. By the time they turned 12, the girls had fully stepped into their identities. No longer just survivors, but individuals bursting with color and energy. Aubrey was thoughtful and poetic, always scribbling verses in her notebook and writing letters she never sent. Lacey had become the house's comic, telling jokes that rarely made sense but always made people laugh anyway. Juniper had an obsession with space and planets, taping glow-in-the-dark stars across her ceiling and reading books on astronomy late into the night. And Haven, fierce, passionate, and sharp, had declared she wanted to be a lawyer, so I can stop bad people with words. Julian, now in his late 40s, had turned down every business offer that tried to pull him back into the corporate world. His legacy didn't live in a tech empire anymore. It lived in the four girls who had once barely dared to speak, and now couldn't stop arguing over which movie to watch on weekends. But one night, an unexpected envelope arrived at the Bexley estate. Heavy, gold-trimmed, sealed in wax. It was an invitation to a high-profile charity gala in New York, honoring individuals who had made extraordinary contributions to children's welfare and recovery. Julian Bexley was to receive the Beacon of Hope Award, and they requested he deliver a speech. At first he planned to go alone. He didn't want to put the girls through that kind of attention again. But when Haven overheard him on the phone, she burst into his office. "Why aren't we going?" Julian blinked. "Because I didn't think you'd want to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of people." "We do," she said firmly. "It's not just your story, Dad. It's ours." The girls agreed unanimously, and so they flew to New York together, stepping off the private jet in dresses they had picked out themselves. One in deep blue, one in scarlet, one in purple gold, and one in ivory. They didn't look like the scared children from Arkansas anymore. They looked like they belonged in the world. The gala hall was dazzling. Chandeliers glittered overhead, music floated through the air, and every table was surrounded by philanthropists, CEOs, and politicians. Yet when Julian entered with the girls, heads turned, not because he was famous, but because of the way the girls held themselves. Proud, graceful, full of light. When it came time for the speech, Julian walked up to the podium, heart racing. But before he could speak, he saw a stir in the crowd. The girls had left their table and were now stepping onto the stage. Aubrey carried a small note in her hands. She stepped up beside Julian and whispered, "We wrote this together. Can we?" He stepped back, stunned, nodding. All 4 girls lined up and each read a single line. Aubrey spoke first. "Once we were forgotten," Lacey continued. "Once we were silent," Juniper said. "Once we were sold like things." Then Haven's voice rang out, clear and full of steel. "But now we are loved, we are seen, and we are Bexleys." The crowd was completely still. Then the applause began, soft at first, then rising like thunder. People stood. Some cried. Julian stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "I didn't rescue them," he said quietly into the microphone. "They rescued me." That night, as they walked out under the city lights, a journalist chased them down and breathlessly asked, "Mr. Bexley, what made you take in those 4 girls?" Julian smiled gently and turned to the girls. "Why don't you ask them?" Aubrey looked the reporter square in the eye and said, "Because he saw us when no one else did." And he didn't look away. It was the truth, and now the whole world had heard it. It was a warm evening in late June, the kind that made the air smell like honeysuckle and the sky stay light just a little longer. The Bexley estate was alive with laughter and gentle music as friends, mentors, and loved ones gathered for a quiet celebration. 12 years since the girls had first come home. There was no media, no photographers, no gala gowns or formal speeches this time. Just a backyard full of string lights, picnic blankets, grilled food, and people who had become part of the girls' lives. Dr. Naomi, the security team that had helped rescue them, their teachers, a few classmates, and the kind librarian who always reserved their favorite books. Julian stood near the large oak tree at the center of the yard, watching his daughters from a distance. They had set up their own booth labeled Future You Booth, where guests could write letters to themselves to be opened in 10 years. Lacey wore a glittery crown made of pipe cleaners. Juniper explained the idea to every new person who approached, like she was curating an art exhibit. Aubrey passed out pens and smiled with a quiet grace that reminded Julian of her mother. Though he never got to meet her, he somehow felt her spirit living in that girl's eyes. And Haven? She stood beside him now, arms crossed, scanning the crowd like she was already the boss of something. "You're proud of us, aren't you?" she said, without turning to look at him. Julian smiled. "More than I know how to say." She glanced up. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped at that gas station?" Julian did think about it. Often. Too often. He saw the alternate timeline in his dreams sometimes. 4 girls, lost forever. A man with too much money and no purpose. A world where they had never found each other. "I don't let myself stay in that thought for long," he said, "because this is the life that matters." As dusk deepened into night, the music softened, and Naomi gathered everyone near the fire pit. She cleared her throat and said, "We're all here tonight because love made an unexpected turn, because one man chose to stop, and because 4 little girls decided to trust someone when they had every reason not to." She gestured toward Julian. He shook his head, humble as always. This was never about being a hero. It was about showing up and not leaving. Aubrey stepped forward then, holding something small in her hands. It was a wooden box with a new locket inside, this time engraved with a single word, Dad. "We had this made," she said. "It's for you, from all of us." Julian opened the box. Inside the locket was a tiny photo, one he didn't even know existed, of the 5 of them asleep on the couch years ago, arms wrapped around each other. He couldn't speak. Tears traced quietly down his cheeks, and he reached forward, pulling all 4 girls into a hug that lasted longer than the applause around them. That night, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Julian sat alone on the porch, the locket in his hand, the sky full of stars. He heard footsteps behind him. Aubrey again. She sat beside him, swinging her feet. "I used to be scared that the good stuff would stop," she said. "Like maybe we didn't deserve it. But now I think maybe we were always meant to find you." Julian looked up at the sky, blinking away tears, then looked at her. I think we were meant to find each other. And somewhere far away from the horrors they once escaped, in a home built not of stone or money but of grace and resilience, a family that never should have existed sat together under a blanket of stars, no longer broken, no longer lost, just together forever. In my view, the ending of this story is the most powerful kind, one rooted not in fantasy, but in deep emotional truth. It doesn't rely on dramatic rescues or over-the-top miracles. The miracle is the healing, the love earned through quiet, patient, persistent presence. Julian didn't save the girls by being rich. He saved them by showing up every single day and refusing to walk away, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. And in turn, they saved him from a life of quiet emptiness by filling it with meaning, chaos, laughter, and a kind of love that can't be bought. The final image of them under the stars, no longer broken, no longer scared, just together, feels like the real victory. Because despite how heavy their past was, they didn't just survive, they transformed. That, to me, is the most beautiful kind of ending. Not the absence of pain, but the rebirth that happens after it. And most of all, the reminder that sometimes the people we least expect, 4 small girls and 1 lonely man, can become everything to each other.